You are listening to I Am Interchange.
I am interchange.
I am interchange.
I am Interchange.
Fostering curiosity, education, and empathy by exploring the controversial and the provocative.
I am interchange.
After a long and successful career in business, including stints at Ernst & Young and Martin Marietta, Powerhouse Technologies upon a return to Montana, and eventually as the CFO and COO, respectively, at RightNow Technologies, now Oracle. Fifth-generation Montanan, Susan Carstensen, is concerned with giving back. I want to see the world a better place, remarks Carstensen. I want to see people do the right things, and I feel more of a responsibility to share it than maintain it. Thankfully, people aren't good at giving up, least of all Carstensen, and her commitment to change engenders reciprocity. In addition to sitting on a handful of boards, she actively supports many local nonprofits, is involved in an equal number of political causes, and dedicates both energy and assets to the establishment and growth of Montana startups. She is the change she seeks to create. I'm Tate Chamberlain, and in this podcast, my guest Susan Carstensen and I attempt to reconcile the assumptions and concerns, absolutes and possibilities surrounding baby boomers' social, political, and economic legacy and its impact on generations to come. Welcome to the I Am Interchange Morning Show. I'm your host, Tate Chamberlain, and I'd like to welcome Susan Carstensen, who's going to be on our upcoming live event, OK Boomer. Good morning, Susan. How's it going?
Good morning, Tate.
So you're a fifth-generation Montanan?
Yes.
What generation were your parents? Were they the Great Generation?
I think so. I'm not exactly sure.
They
didn't. I know my dad was never of the age to actually serve in the war.
Oh,
so
okay.
he was too young for that.
So maybe the silent generation?
Yes.
What did they do for work?
My dad was a criminal defense attorney. He went to school in Missoula, criminal defense attorney in Billings. And my mom stayed home for most of, the lives of I've got 5 siblings until I hit probably junior high, and then she went back to work and worked at a credit union. Oh,
okay, cool. And you grew up in the Bozeman area?
Billings.
What kind of got you started in your trajectory with education?
I would say education was always a big deal growing up. My dad expected a lot in that area. I was good at school. My siblings were better at sports.
You got the brain. Your siblings got the athletics.
All the athletic ability. I just knew. I never had a specific goal of what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to go to college. Yeah, but that was just like a given. It was just a matter of how was I going to get to college. I did all the things because I wanted to go to Stanford. And then we penciled out, it's like how much something like that would cost. And it's like, MSU looks a little better.
Oh, okay. So you wanted to go to Stanford and you aimed all your testing and then you budgeted it out.
I got in.
You got into Stanford.
I got in.
And then MSU, Montana State or MSU Billings?
Montana State.
Okay, cool. So in Bozeman.
Skiing's better in Bozeman.
That's what got me to come to Bozeman also. What did you wind up majoring in?
I started in political science, had some theories of going to law school, had some theory of being a journalist, somebody had told me I should take some business classes, that would be good. So I ended up over in the business school taking some accounting classes, business classes, and a couple years into it, I had one of the professors call me in and go, "We keep seeing you over here. What are you doing over here?" So I was like, "I don't know. I'm just taking classes." He goes, "Well, you're good at it. Why don't you keep doing it?" And so I actually have a dual degree in political science, pre-law, and business accounting.
Oh, okay. And so fast forward to RightNow Technologies. That's where you kind of fit into there. Before that, tell me about the first dollar that you ever earned.
First dollar I earned was cleaning these really lousy apartments in Billings. Somebody my dad knew had this apartment building, so I'd clean them after people moved out.
Before they got their deposits back?
Yeah, I hope none of them got their deposits back.
Because they were pretty awful.
Yeah.
So you were the backup when someone didn't clean up very well. Then they would call
I cleaned these apartments in Billings.
So you wound up becoming the CFO for RightNow Technologies. What year was that?
Well, after college, I moved to Denver, and I worked for Ernst & Young for 6 years, and then Marietta for 4 years, and then actually moved back to Montana with another public company that was called Powerhouse Technologies. Public company, turnaround scenario, but became the CFO there. And then when we sold it, I had a couple different people introduce me to the founder of RightNow Technologies, Greg Gianforte, and met with him and became I started as the CFO there in 1999.
Okay, and then it was later sold. Greg Gianforte is Montana's lone congressman. And in 1999, when did it get sold?
2012.
To Oracle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was the CFO for approximately 8 years, and then I was the chief operating officer for probably 3 years, and then I was the senior vice president of customer experience for the last year or so.
There's a few heavy hitters that came out of that organization. There's a lot of them, actually, I think, you included, but also I think this is really interesting that one of our senators, Steve Daines, who is the VP of RightNow.
He was the VP of, he was originally customer service and then install-based sales and then Asia-Pac. So he's running our operations out of Japan and Australia.
What is your relationship like with them now?
Currently, the three of us all work together. I mean, Steve worked for me. I worked for Greg. We all work together. RightNow is a great business story. Politically, we are very opposite. And we were back then too, but it just doesn't show itself kind of in the business world as much as it does when they started running for office.
So it really became a little bit more polarized after they started to run for office. You started to notice the differences a little bit more?
Well, no, I always noticed the differences. It just didn't really matter in the workplace. It wasn't like they were impacting people's lives in a negative way by virtue of their political positions.
How would they describe you?
Probably the same way. I mean, we all work together very well and, built a great business. They don't support my political positions, just like I don't support their political positions. I mean, we see each other, we say hello. I mean, there's not, it's not like I won't talk to them.
Yeah.
Or vice versa.
Mm-hmm. What's the first thought that goes through your mind when you hear "Okay, Boomer"?
Probably two reactions. One is, it feels like a comment designed to be like, shut up and sit down and shut up, which I don't have a lot of experience in my life with people telling me to shut down and sit up, or sit down, telling me to sit down and shut up. And so, you can't react too positively about that. But I'd say the second part that goes into my mind, I do think we have not listened to younger people, and I think they're making an awful lot of sense right now. And I think the boomers have screwed a lot of things up, and so, we deserve it in a certain sense.
You alluded a little bit to it, but why do you think that became a term? And to clarify, you are a baby boomer.
I was born in 1962, so what year is exactly the boomer?
64 is when it ended. I think you're on the tail end of it.
Okay.
So,
I prefer to think of myself as younger, but I guess that's true.
Why did baby boomers get that term, "Okay, Boomer"?
I haven't studied it to that extent. I've mainly read some articles, and you see it online. But I think it's a reaction from younger generations who really are profoundly angry at what's happened, in our politics, in the environment, in any number of areas where they feel like the people who have come before them have profoundly messed things up. They're reacting to I'll never forget, we came out of, this was after the last election, and I was with a friend of mine and our two daughters, and one of the daughters was just like, I don't think people over 35 should be allowed to vote. It's not their future, it's our future. And that actually, I'm like, there's some merit to that.
Would you allow that to happen?
35, no.
Would you give up your vote if all of the younger generation turned out?
Yes.
If you were sure that they would turn out?
Yeah.
That's interesting, because the future is in our hands, isn't it?
It is.
What's your experience with people like letting go of power, though?
Power is kind of a funny thing, but I think people can start to believe that it's like only they know better. Only they know best. Only they have, the wisdom, and therefore need to carry it forward. And power is a appealing, gratifying thing personally, right? People look to you or do whatever, and people aren't good at giving it up, but doesn't mean it doesn't need to happen.
Yeah, one thing that interests me is my thought was always that boomers were just a bunch of hippies and then they got a bunch of money and then they turned conservative to protect it. But I don't think that's entirely accurate. I think that the hippies turned into today's progressives.
Boy, I do think, I think generically, and you hate to be too broad, people tend to get a little more conservative as they age. And whether it's to protect wealth or to kind of protect what they have, or an affinity or fondness for an earlier time, I think that generically happens with age.
Would you describe, does that fit you?
No.
How would you define yourself as a boomer?
From a background perspective, I think you asked, and I said my dad was a lawyer. It sounds all, he was a criminal defense attorney who, and by and large, like criminals in Montana don't actually have a lot of money. So it's not like that's a high wealth position. Mm. So there was no wealth in our family growing up. I mean, it was things like, somebody would come paint the house in exchange for their legal fees. So it was not like a wealthy upbringing. My motivation in terms of, and it wasn't like a motivation to quite, to accumulate wealth, but my motivation was always, I want to be able to take care of myself and my family. And so that was part of the practical piece of college, going, okay, a business degree is probably a good thing. I can probably always get a job in this field. And I don't want to be dependent on anybody else. And so there was there was also a strong kind of feminist strain throughout that too. I did these jobs, that I found myself good at and enjoying, and had the incredible, whether it's luck or privilege or whatever, but I made a lot of money at it, which is bizarre to me. But so from a boomer perspective, I guess at the stage I'm at in life right now, it's more about, I kind of hate the phrase giving back, but it is around sharing. And so I don't have a personal need to maintain power, to maintain wealth. I want to see, I want to see the world a better place. I want people to do the right things, and I feel more of a responsibility to share it than maintain it.
Okay. You don't necessarily need to keep the power, but you're looking for different ways to support other things and bring them up.
I think that's a fair statement. I was at some goofy conference in Arizona, and this has to be probably close to 25 years ago. And they left some, little saying thing on the bed, right? And it was like guidance for a Pueblo child or something. But it was like, and it was stand for what is right, work hard, and share. For alone you are nothing. And it resonated for me back then. I actually still have the card, and take it out and look at it. And business is always, you talk about like articulating your values or what are your core values or whatever. And so I thought, okay, as a person, you should figure out what your core values are. And while I'm plagiarizing completely from this card, I didn't make it up, it has always resonated for me. And so when I've been faced with a hard decision or, what should I do, I really do think about that. And it's like, am I standing for what's right? Am I working hard? And am I sharing?
Yeah, I align with that. I mean, in my experience with you, you've embodied all of those.
Thank you.
What should the baby boomers be most proud of?
Well, again, there's two sides to almost everything, but I think the boomers did work hard and create a lot of technological advances. And when you think of the world and how it changed, in the last 40 years, the pace of change has just gone up dramatically. There have been a lot of inventions and a lot of forward progress in a number of different areas. and maybe that would be your next question, but I think the downside to it is that it went so fast and every change was seen as like good and positive that they didn't think through kind of the long-term implications of it. Do I believe people are out there deliberately trying to poison the oceans and our land with plastic? No, it was like a convenience, and it was an incredible convenience, and it helped with food storage and all these different things and packaging. And plastics in general.
Alone, yeah.
Plastics in general. It wasn't like some evil conspiracy to ruin the world. It was like, oh, this is progressive in a sense change.
This is going to help people not be hungry because they will store longer, for one example.
Right. Or lower the cost of transportation for goods to get goods and services around the world. And nobody really thought through the downside is nobody thought through the long-term implications of this material that, won't, disintegrate ever. And then poisons the oceans and you can't get rid of. And now all of a sudden it's so ubiquitous that it's like everybody uses it, that it's like now we're all paying the price for it. And how do you get rid of it? How do you roll back some of the things you thought were good changes?
Oh my gosh, I can't go to the grocery store without having something with plastic on it.
Right, and even when you try, because I've tried, and it's just like...
Yeah, it's dang near impossible. Unless there's like a Whole Foods bulk dispensary type thing.
But what are you typically putting it in? A little plastic bag?
Yeah, at the you got to bring one. My parents are baby boomers, and this topic has been hard for me to kind of explore with them. I sent them the description, and they were completely offended. It's come a long way, but it was written by a millennial.
So what's your definition right now?
Oh, I sent them the write-up about this topic, kind of about the wealth inequality. But one thing I've come back to is we don't know what we don't know. Like you mentioned with the plastics, there was that good intention around it, and then the unintended consequences of that. Do you have another example where that might have happened?
Well, I'm not going to get all my time frames right, but I would say the same thing is true with oil and coal, and how do you these natural resources were seen as a way to heat homes more effectively and power the new economy, and they were all create jobs, all these good things without thinking through the long-term consequences.
Could they have known?
I don't know. I'm a bit of a believer, and there's always other options. I think if there would have been a more, natural resource extraction is by definition always of limited capacity anyway, and so by definition it's a short-term solution to an issue, and so if you would have put the same amount of energy and thought and research into other alternatives, sure.
It reminds me of World War II, for example, and everybody was involved or they would die, basically. And the urgency that coal and oil played in the war effort and how that expedited maybe the development of it and how boomers and future generations used it. Did World War II, for example, lock the technology in to pursue that for the next 50, 60 years, as opposed to something renewable?
I'm sure it had an influence. They used it and it was effective, and it's like, oh, let's keep doing it. That's where the lack of kind of long-term planning, I think, hindered where we're at. And there's trade-offs, it's like nothing is, I guess when you talk about like OK Boomer too, and this focus on kind of the past, and nothing's as black and white or simplistic as sometimes people want to make it seem. For me, the single biggest thing is it's like we are where we are right now. We can analyze the past, we can talk about it. We certainly should learn lessons from it. Let's figure out how we go forward. What are the best paths forward, as opposed to beating up somebody for what happened in the past.
So you would rather than people saying, okay, boomer, you want to say, hey, cool it a little minute and let me do this with you, rather than that I won't forgive you judgment of the past.
Right, because I do believe it's a mix. I mean, I don't in any way, shape, or form believe I have all the answers, but I still don't buy into the premise that I should sit down and shut up.
You're not going to relinquish the power of your voice.
True.
But maybe your right to vote if everyone under 35 voted.
Maybe not the 35, but move it up just a little bit.
I was going to say you can't even be president unless you're 35.
Right. You might have to make it 45 or 50 even.
So this transfer of wealth has always happened, and some of the statistics that I've read about the boomers transition, boomers and the silent generation, a lot of people don't consider that there's another generation still alive on top of the boomers. Even some of the great generation is still around. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of statistics. One is $30 trillion and the other is $68 trillion of wealth that are going to be transferred in the next 30 years, as well as 35 million houses are going to go on the market. Let's talk about the housing. As you see Bozeman growing like it is, and knowing that this huge amount of houses are going to be for sale in the next 30 years, what do you think of when you hear something like that?
In part, I think that's a good thing because there's clearly a shortage of housing, and so having it, turn over is probably a good thing for everybody.
Do you think there'll be too many? Do you think there'll be a surplus because there's way more boomers than there are any other generation?
I don't think there's going to be a surplus. I think we're at such a deficit right now that I don't believe there'll be a surplus.
Do you think as the availability comes to the market, will the housing prices stay how they are, or will they raise, or will they get lower?
I'm not an economic forecaster in terms of housing prices, but I think some of them will change significantly. It's like I think, for example, if we go Bozeman specifically, is like overbuilt in terms of kind of large homes. And so when I think about them turning over, I don't see kind of the next generations of young families, wanting to buy into these 5-bedroom homes per se. I feel like there's going to be a lot more creative living arrangements similar to like Blunderbuss, where groups of people, or I think some of the zoning stuff needs to really change.
As I've learned, Blunderbuss is kind of the county's experiment. Going through our BLR review, they have no idea how to classify us, and so we're literally their first experiment. I read a great article about a group of lady best friends who all saved up and bought a house together, and their plan and intention is to just grow old together.
I could see that. That'd be interesting.
I really liked that. With senior living, I read a lot about how seniors are lonely, and America especially has kind of lost that connection with family, and they're older.
Yeah, we've isolated them, and it's less of a community. I would say I first saw that, in a sense, when I moved to Denver after college, and one of the benefits of Colorado and Denver was it certainly was more racially diverse, but how people get how you end up in certain communities, you got your work people and where you live, it ended up being so much more less diverse than my experience in Montana, because you were like working with same age kind of people as you were living in a certain community that was all like same age as you, and so you didn't have like for me growing up, having the two elderly neighbors on each side where we had to like mow their lawn and shovel their walks all the time. Yeah. It was just an expectation, and you knew them, and therefore then you got to know their families. Mm-hmm. And so there was a lot more age and economic diversity, because there's just not enough kind of groups of people that were in your exact same circumstance. So there was a lot more economic diversity than for me in Denver was like incredibly non-diverse.
It's totally compartmentalized now, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wish I lived closer to my grandparents. They were all the way. They're not alive anymore, but they were all the way across the country. My parents moved for economic reasons, and they made that split, I think, with the intimacy of their family being close.
Yeah, no, it's a tough choice, and it's a little odd to me right now. I feel like people are less willing to move than like for me in whatever it would have been, like 1985, coming out of college, sure, my husband and I both loved Bozeman, and that sounded great, but it was like economically, that was a dead end. And so it was like, well, wait, no, we're moving. It's just a matter of where. It's like, are we moving to New York? Are we moving to San Francisco? We compromised on Denver,
Yeah.
But it was like there was no, and my older siblings, they all moved, and they spent, years in Alaska, and one still in Seattle, but we were all willing to move and felt the need to kind of move and make choices for economic reasons, whereas people seem far less willing to move. And that's not always the answer when you think about like rural, because a lot of times people will be like, oh, like a rural community move. That's not always the answer, but sometimes it actually is.
Which one's better, moving for economic and life experience reasons or staying with family and preserving that relationship?
I know for myself, moving on the economic side was way, way better because I got some 10 years of invaluable experience, with larger companies and more just experience and training and exposure than I think I could have gotten literally at any job, at any company in Montana because I left. And so then coming back, I was the one with experience. And so it's like, oh, I could come in at a higher level and bring some of that experience and learnings. And so I've had, whether it was, CFO of Powerhouse or CFO and COO, RightNow Technologies, those have got to be like two of the best jobs in the financial space in the last 20 years in Montana.
And you wouldn't have had that if you didn't leave and come back?
Never. And so economically it was good. I think, my parents, even though, we've got this fifth generation Montana thing going and I love Montana. Most of what I do right now is very focused on Montana and helping the startup ecosystem, the tech ecosystem, a variety of things in Montana. They never pretended like it was the center of the universe. Sometimes Montanans like to go, oh my God, this is it, and this is the best place in the world, and no place would ever be anywhere near as good. And, I've traveled enough and lived enough. It's like, there's all kinds of great places in the world. And you should probably learn that it's not, like, this is not the center of the universe. And you may end up choosing and you want to stay here and be here, and that's great, and I respect that choice. But it's not the center, and there is a whole world out there.
When you consider this wealth transfer, so the statistic is when baby boomers were in their 20s, they held 23% of the nation's wealth. And now that millennials are in their 20s, they hold 3% of the nation's wealth. When you think about this wealth transfer, do you think that millennials can handle and manage that kind of money without having that experience of having it?
Are you assuming they're getting it because the boomers they're inheriting it from their boomer parents?
I mean, not in every way. I mean, the transfer will happen all over. I mean, boomers will give it to nonprofits and all sorts of stuff, but also the transitional wealth with inheritance and however else money will be transferred. But it will be a new generation managing it that hasn't had much experience in managing a lot of wealth before.
Well, I guess my hope would be that it isn't so much just a generational transfer, that it actually, because the economic, the disparity right now between income levels is just, it's too great that, the whole thing's going to fall down and fall apart if that doesn't change. And so my hope is that opposed to it just being a generational thing, that there is more dispersion of that wealth across a far greater number of people that are currently holding it right now. I think that's the bigger problem. Is if it's just purely, from a small number to a small number. That small number, sure, can they figure out how to manage it and pay people to help manage it and everything? Probably.
I've actually read that the polarization in income inequality will get worse after that happens if it stays the status quo.
I supported a number of different kind of candidates and principles and things like that. I'm not a policy kind of person. I figure I'll leave that up to the smart people that I hope to elect. But whether it's through taxation or various things, I just think the disparity and the concentration has got to be solved. And so I think that's the bigger area of focus for the next 20 years than worrying about the ultimate, can the whatevers manage. I think we need to do stuff now to make sure that there is more dispersion of it.
Do you think capitalism will solve the climate crisis?
No. I think it has a role to play in it. I struggle with where capitalism has ever solved kind of a big, broad problem. I think capitalism is great at solving narrower problems where, then self-interested parties can, money can change hands and you can make money on something. But, for example, it's like capitalism, I don't believe, ever built like the interstate highways. Which transportation across the U.S. was kind of a big, large-scale problem.
So
I don't think capitalism created Yellowstone Park, or the national park system. Capitalism didn't create those things; policy did.
Oh, okay. How did it get paid for, or was it in partnership with capitalism?
Like Yellowstone Park? No, that was just a policy commitment from I believe like Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, it took 30 years to put in place.
Yeah.
And they were able to deploy like the army to protect it until they could get it established as a national park. But there wasn't like capitalism solved for that because there's no.
But capitalism maintains it.
How? No, our taxes and fees keep it open and maintain it.
Isn't that like capitalism though?
You're equating taxation
from people who made money off of capitalism getting taxed and it going into the park system.
I don't equate that. No.
I guess
I'm not saying there's a better. I think capitalism is the right system, but I just don't think you can count on it, along with associated tax policy or whatever, purely to solve big problems unless you've got policy decisions and choices. That's where the tax money goes.
So it capitalism in part, but there's a few other things at play that are going to have to be there as well.
Oh yeah, you can choose to support. For example, okay, we've got capitalism right now. We've got taxation right now. You can either choose to support healthcare for broader groups of people, or you can say no, let the fittest survive. And if you've got money to pay your policies, great. If you don't, go die. Capitalism and taxation aren't going to solve that. It's choices that will solve for that.
Okay. This is kind of far out. So when it comes to climate, is it terrorism to tell someone that they'll die if they don't do what you say for someone who doesn't believe in climate change?
No.
Someone told me that. They said it was terrorism to tell people that they would die if they didn't conform to the Green New Deal.
Well, that's starting to get a little too black and white. If you don't do this. But is it terrorism? No. I mean, are they threatening their lives or their children or something like that to make that statement? For me, that's an expression of belief. If you don't support the Green New Deal, you're going to die. That's an expression of belief. I wouldn't go that far, in part because like I said, I'm not Green New Deal or bust, but it's like we've got to do something, that's for sure.
Having children yourself and seeing this younger generation and the amount of challenges that they're going to face, do you think younger generations should have kids?
That would be, so what if nobody has kids and we just eliminate all the population of the planet and kill everybody off and have no people on the planet? Do I think that's an answer from a pure kind of black and white perspective? No.
Or just not wanting to put your children through that?
Yeah, it's such a difference in perspective. You're right. I have two kids. I'm glad I went through that. I'm glad I have kids. I think it's their individual choice in terms of whether they want to have kids or not. Would I advise them? It's like, don't have kids because you're going to put them on a dying planet. I guess I have more faith that we can do something. I would never advise that.
Do you believe that baby boomers are leaving a better world than when they found it?
In some areas, yes. I believe, women, for example, have more rights or whatever than when they found it. I think civil rights have moved forward. Do I believe the planet is currently better off right now? No. So I think it's a mixed bag. I think everybody, and everybody gets left with a mixed bag. I think the climate is a true existential crisis that has got to be solved now and soon and immediately and with a lot of efforts put toward it. But I guess I don't, and I don't believe that it's like, oh, geez, there's going to be some magical technology solution to the climate, and so that we should just ignore everything and assume that's going to come. I think you do want to keep putting research and efforts into that kind of area. I think you've got to put immediate resources and efforts into mitigation, because some of what we've done and where we're at, no matter what we do, we're moving forward, with the changes in temperature. And so mitigation, whether it's low-lying communities or a whole variety of areas, I think mitigation is going to be very real. But I think we've got to start making the efforts to do better from and eliminate whatever the carbon or the plastics. So I think it's a threefold problem that needs to be addressed at all levels.
I keep going back to we don't know what we don't know, but now that it's being kind of fast forwarded and understood more now, there's kind of this teaming up urgency to acknowledge the planet that we all live on, and it's going to take all of us to do that, and finding all the little things that we can mitigate right now before we have the large solution.
Yeah, it'll be all of it. I think we're better off now. I think the pace of change and the role of technology is good. The progress the boomers made or whatever is good, only because that can now be applied, and I would throw globalization in with it too. I mean, we do live on a whole planet. It's not like there's anything we can do here in Bozeman just to solve for Bozeman. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, been part of the progress, but now actually applying that to the future is the key challenge.
And how we get there. What advice do you have for the younger generations?
Vote, continue speaking up. It's like, I think the voice of, I really do think the movement on some of the gun safety, gun violence done by some of the students and the young voices, it's like, I think they will win.
Just a matter of time.
It's just a matter of time. And so it's like, don't get so cynical or discouraged. I mean, the democracy that, we live in is not pretty. There is sausage made, it's ugly, and it doesn't include compromise, but it's like, anyway, don't get discouraged or cynical or disengaged, as opposed to moving forward to get the things you want and need.
Susan Carstensen, thanks so much for being here. I'm looking forward to our event, OK Boomer, featuring you.
Yeah, I've never thought of myself as a boomer, but okay.
All right, we'll see you later. As Carstensen sagely remarks, we are where we are right now. We can analyze the past. We can talk about it. We certainly should learn lessons from it. But let's figure out how we can go forward. What are the best paths forward? As opposed to beating up somebody for what happened in the past, those who came before us worked hard and ushered in technological advancements at breakneck speed. Every advance was good progress. But those good intentions can have unintended and unforeseeable consequences. For Susan, that path forward is a reflective and compassionate one. It requires income inequality. The disparity and concentration has got to be solved. It demands the creation of progressive policy rather than a reliance on capitalism to solve the big problems. It requires immediate and intensive environmental mitigation and research efforts to impact the climate crisis. It involves faith that we, as a united multi-generational front, can do better. As her unexpected mantra for life advises, stand for what is right, work hard, and share. For alone, you are nothing.
A special thank you to Susan Carstensen, Zocalo Coffee House, Whistle Pig Korean, the State of Montana, Ben Johnson Photography, Loken Productions, Superfluous Industries, and Blunderbuss.
A shout out to our editors and media team, Pat Loken, Jessup Sandoval, Allison Gregory, Shannon Hughes, Jessica Byerly, Jacob Desch, Nathaniel Johns, and Nicholas Hill. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? We want to hear from you. Shoot me a message at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Until next time, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.